Hey guys, it's Monday the 19th of February and we are 40 days away from Passover, which is on the 30th of March. So in front of you, if some of you have watched the videos in the past, you'll know that this is the timeline that I created, which was my thinking around the blood moons of 2014 and 2015, and how each blood moon pointed to a next feast. So the first Passover would point to the first Passover, which was after the blood moon, and basically what it would mean was that we had two Passovers and two Sukkots left. So it would be Passover, Sukkot, Passover, Sukkot. So I've been looking at this timeline and thinking to myself, well, if God was going to give us this warning signal, and my assumption was that we wouldn't make it to Passover before the rapture of the church, but maybe it's being even more specific. Maybe it's saying that we've got Passover, Sukkot, Passover, Sukkot, and then this is where it's actually going to happen. Now, I know you're probably all rolling your eyes and thinking, oh, here we go with another date, and believe me, I feel the same way as well. But if you just give me a little bit of your time and stick with me, maybe you'll see that Passover is actually, from my perspective, having done the possibilities of a rapture on Rosh Hashanah and on Sukkot and on Shemini Atzeret and all of these feasts that we saw subsequent to the Revelation chapter 12 sign. If I'm honest, I have to say that I believe that Passover is more of a match to the rapture of the church than any other feast of Israel. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later. So just going over this again, remember we had two blood moons in 2014 and then two blood moons in 2015. So that was Passover, Sukkot, Passover, Sukkot. Then we had Passover, Sukkot, Passover, and then came all these celestial signs. We saw the Great American Eclipse on August the 21st. We saw the Revelation chapter 12 sign shortly after that on September the 23rd. Then came Sukkot, and then we had these three supermoons, which were then followed up by the super blue blood moon on the 31st of January. So this was like the biggest blood moon of them all. So the next feast that's coming up before Israel turns 70 years old, or should I say the last feast that's coming up before Israel turns 70 years old, is Passover. I also just want to point out that Passover is exactly 188 days from the Revelation chapter 12 sign, and we know that 8 means new beginnings in the Bible, and it's also exactly 88 days away from the 1st of January, or the first day of the year. So I'm thinking, what are the possibilities of the rapture being on Passover? And that's what I'm going to cover in this video from a scriptural perspective. And again, as I said, I think personally, if you ask me, because this is the first time I've looked at Passover as a potential date for the rapture, I think that Passover matches the rapture requirements based on prophetic patterns in the past better than all the other feasts do, because the other feasts, certain things happen on them from a celebration perspective, but they don't really have a prophetic fulfillment which has happened in the past, which we can say, look, this has happened in the past, and how does it match up to what we would expect on the rapture of the church. I'm also going to go through some celestial stuff that's happening in the heavens, which makes this Passover fairly unique, and I'll show you that at the end of the video. So that's what I'm going to cover in this video, and I hope you enjoy. So considering the Passover rapture in Exodus chapter 12 is the Exodus from Egypt chapter that God kills all the firstborn of Egypt. So interesting chapter, that Exodus chapter 12. And the verse that I wanted to pull out of there that really hit home with me was verse 42. It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord, for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations. And I'm going to go into this verse a little bit more detail a little bit later. but that's the verse that I really want to concentrate on. So starting off with the covenant with Abraham that God made with Abraham, and how this matches up to the new covenant which God has made with us through Christ. Abraham is a type of Christ, and the promise was made to Abraham that he would have the generations as much as the sands of the sea. And God comes to Abraham in Genesis chapter 17. It says, "And when Abraham was 90 years old and 9, so 99, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be thou perfect, and I will make my covenant between me and thee, and I will multiply thee exceedingly." And then it goes on in verse 21 to say, "But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year." And he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abraham. And Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the selfsame day, as God had said unto him. And Abraham was 90 years old and 9, and he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. In the selfsame day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son. And all the men of his house born in the house and bought with the money of the stranger were circumcised with them. So I wanted to just make a point of the circumcision here, so that you can see it's very specific about the circumcision that takes place when the covenant of Abraham is made. And the reference, or the cross-reference to Genesis chapter 17 in the New Testament is Galatians 3:16. In Galatians 3:16 it says, "Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, that is God, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. And this I say, that the covenant that was confirmed before of God in Christ the law, which was 430 years after, cannot disannul, that it should make the promise of none effect." So Paul is just saying here in the epistle to the Galatians that he's confirming that the covenant made with Abraham, it was for 430 years, and that was how long Egypt were masters over Israel, or the Hebrews were in servitude to Egypt. And they come out of Egypt in Exodus 12. So this is where God says to them, he tells them about the lamb. And what's going to happen, I'm sure you've all read it before, but let's just go over it. It says, "Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. Ye shall take it out from the sheep or the goats, and ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month." So that's the 14th of Nisan, that's Passover when Jesus was crucified. "And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall keep it in the evening." So they take this lamb and they actually bring it into their house, and they keep it in their home. "And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the 2 side posts and on the upper door posts of the houses," so in the shape of a cross, "wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden at all with water, but roast it with fire, his head and his legs, and with the purtenance thereof. And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning. And that which remaineth of it, in the morning shall ye burn with fire, and thus shall ye eat it." Now listen to this. He says, "With your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste." So the manner in which they're actually eating the Passover lamb is to get out of there. It's to be ready, and to have the loins girded, and to be ready to move. And he's telling them to eat it in haste, eat it quickly, because this is the Lord's Passover. And then he says, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and I will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. Against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and upon the 2 side posts, the Lord will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. And ye shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever." Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years, so to the very day. So God made his covenant with Abraham, as it says here, and it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass that all the host of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So when God made his covenant with Abraham, it was on Passover. And in verse 42 here is where it says this key verse. It says, "It is a night to be much observed unto the Lord for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord to be observed of all of the children of Israel in their generations." This is a warning saying that this is the night to be observed. And I can't think of any other feast, if you will, that's in the Bible, which actually speaks of a specific day, saying this is the night which needs to be observed. So there is that. In Genesis 17, the cross reference to Exodus 12:44, and you'll remember the circumcision verse that I was reading in Genesis 17 when he makes this covenant with Abraham. It says in Exodus 12 verses 44, it says, "But every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then he shall eat thereof." So if the servant has been purchased, he's then allowed to participate in the Passover. So he's been purchased by the owner of the house. And remember, the first thing that Abraham did was to circumcise Ishmael and circumcise himself when he was 99 years old, which must have been fairly painful. And then in Genesis 17, the cross-reference to Exodus 12:48 is, "When the stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord, let his males be circumcised." So here's the circumcision again. And we know in the New Covenant it's the circumcision of the heart, and that God gives us a new heart. "And let him come near and keep it, and he shall be as one that is born in the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof." And that's obviously the grafting in of the Gentiles, and we are sojourners in the land of Israel, who've been grafted into the covenant. So this is very interesting about Exodus chapter 12 and Genesis 17. There's cross references there and similar things which are going on when the covenant is made and when the covenant with Abraham is fulfilled, and Egypt then have to release Israel, and Israel come out of Egypt as a nation. They went in as a family with Jacob, and they came out as a nation of Israel. So here's that verse that I was talking about. Passover, the only night commanded as a watch, and this isn't just watch as a verb. This is a noun. This is a specific watch. So again, in Exodus 12:42, "It is a night to be much observed," and the word there is shemur, "unto the Lord for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord to be observed." And again, the word is shemur, and this word is only used twice in the Bible. And both of those times, it's in this verse. So the other words for watch in the Bible are shakad, which is a verb, which is to be awake or to be watchful, and to have a sense of protection or vigilance. But the word is actually a verb, so it's something like "I'll keep watch," "I'll watch out." And the other word for watch is tsafar, which is also a verb. And that is to watch as an action in the present tense. So I am watching, or I am currently looking out. But this particular word, shemur, is a noun which describes a watch, as in a period. It's a vigil or the watch. In other words, this is not described elsewhere in the Bible, but particularly for Passover. So I wanted to bring that to your attention for this particular feast which is coming up. And I find that very interesting. Then there's the firstborn cry. In Exodus 12:29 it says, "And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead." Can you imagine? And what I find interesting is Zechariah chapter 12. It says, "And I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplication, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced." And when did they pierce him? They pierced him on Passover. When would be a better time for Israel to have their blindness removed than on Passover? Can you think of a better feast for Israel to have their blindness removed and to be weeping and mourning over Christ than on Passover? And they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. You see, it's a cry for the firstborn of the dead, who is Jesus Christ. He's the firstborn of the dead. And he says here that the house of David, all the Jews, are going to mourn for him. And upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem, this is the whole of Jerusalem. And they shall look unto me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. And in that day there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem. So this is obviously not at the end of the tribulation, because Israel is out of Jerusalem. This must be the beginning that they're mourning. They're mourning the Messiah at the rapture of the church. I believe that this is what that is talking about, is that they are going to mourn for Jesus Christ when the church disappears. And in that day there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem, as the mourning of the Hadidram in the valley of Megiddo. And the land shall mourn, every family apart. You see, it's the same thing as all of the families in Egypt lost their firstborn. And every family, there was not one who did not mourn, because there was not a house where there was not one dead. And in Zechariah 12, it's talking about every family. The family of the house of David and their wives apart, and the family of the house of Nathan and their wives apart, and the family of the house of Levi and their wives apart, and the family of the house of Shema and their wives apart, and all the families that remain, every family apart and their wives apart, shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. You see, there's a similarity there. So I just think that at the rapture of the church, Zechariah 12:10 is referring to when Israel discover that Jesus Christ is Lord, when the blindness is removed from Israel at the coming in of the Gentiles, and this is what's going to happen. And because of the firstborn similarity, I just wonder if the potential is that that's going to happen on the Passover, just like it did the last time. Then there's the song of the church in heaven, and that is the 24 elders in heaven. If you've studied the book of Revelation, you'll know that the 24 elders who are in heaven are represented as the church, and they are redeemed by every nation, every kindred, every tongue, and every people. So they're not a literal 24 people. They are the representation of the church, the kings and the priests. After the rapture of the church, which happens at Revelation 4:1, after this, John says, I looked, and behold, a door was open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet talking with me, which said, Come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter. And then John is in heaven, and there's the throne of God, and the beasts, which are the cherubims and the seraphims, and the 24 elders are there. The church is there. And Revelation 4:1 describes that which John sees. And then in Revelation chapter 5 is when Jesus makes his appearance, when God says, Who is worthy to open the book and loose the seals thereof? And then Jesus is there. But look at what they're saying. The 24 elders, look at what they're saying, and look at what John sees in Revelation chapter 5. He says, And I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within and on the backside, sealed with 7 seals. That's God the Father. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, Who is worthy to open the book and to loose the seals thereof? And no man in heaven, nor in earth, neither under the earth, was able to open the book, neither to look thereon. You're not even going to be able to look at it. And I wept much, John wept much, because no man was found worthy to open the book and to read it, neither to even look thereon. And one of the elders said unto me, Weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof. And look at what John sees. And I beheld, lo, in the midst of the throne 4 beasts, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb, as it had been slain. Passover, he's our Passover lamb, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, sent forth in all the earth. And he came and took the book out of the right hand of him that sat on the throne. And when he had taken the book, the 4 beasts and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, the Passover Lamb, having every one of them harps and golden vials and full of odors, which are the prayer of the saints. And then it continues in Revelation 5:9. And they sang a new song. What are they singing in heaven? The 24 elders, the church, what are they singing? Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof. For thou wast slain and hast redeemed us unto God by thy blood. The Passover Lamb has redeemed us to God by his blood, of every kindred and every tongue and every people and every nation. His blood is what has redeemed us, the Lamb, and has made us unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. And I beheld and I heard the voice of many angels round about the throne, and the beasts and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000, and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, Worthy is the Lamb that was slain, the Passover Lamb, to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. So next I'm going to show you what's interesting about Passover and the celestial occurrences which are happening in the heavens at this time. So what you can see in front of you is what the ancients would have seen. This, I've got my location set to Jerusalem, Israel. Here you can see Jerusalem, Israel. And it's 8 p.m. on March the 30th, which is Passover. And directly above Israel, if I show the ecliptic, we're looking straight up, is Jupiter. And then there's this big full moon on the 14th of Nisan. So from March the 30th to March the 31st is Passover. And on the left here you can see Saturn and Mars. So what the ancients used to believe was Saturn and Mars were malefic planets. So if God is telling a story in the heavens, there need to be good players, which are Jupiter and Venus, and bad players, Saturn and Mars. Whether that's what people believe these days is really irrelevant, but that's a fact based on the Babylonian tablets that were left to us, and that's what the wise men who found the baby Jesus would have believed, that Saturn and Mars were malefic planets. So what's unique about this is that on this full moon, which is Passover, Mars and Saturn are the closest together and will be the closest together for at least another 2 years. So if I go and enable the constellation figures, you can see that the moon, which is almost like the finger pointer, is in Virgo, which is the woman, Israel, and Jupiter is still in Libra, which is either the scales or the holy altar, and Mars is in Sagittarius, with Saturn doing its closest pass by on a full moon. So if I show the constellation drawings, you can see that this is Sagittarius. John said he saw a rider with a bow and a crown, and this is the depiction of the beast. So I believe that this Sagittarius is a picture of the Antichrist, and we see Jupiter in Libra, and the big bright full moon is in Virgo. So if we go to the next full moon, which will be a month later, so I'm going to go to around about April the 30th or thereabouts, you'll see that Mars has moved on, and it's nowhere near Saturn anymore. And if we go back a month, you can see, so Passover just happens to be when Mars is going to be the closest to Saturn in Sagittarius. So that's really all I can say is interesting about the Passover. And also Venus is going into Aries, which obviously Aries is the lamb. So what I'm going to do is just go over a few headlines which are in the media recently, and I think if you've got this far in the video, you're probably somebody who keeps track of what's happening in Israel and what's happening with the geopolitics in the world. And we can see that Hezbollah are issuing a fresh threat against Israel's offshore gas rigs. Israel have two major offshore gas rigs in the Mediterranean Sea, and Lebanon are laying claim to them. And Lebanon are hosting the Iranian proxy guerrilla military wing, which is Hezbollah, and they have long-standing feuds with Israel. And here they are threatening Israel's offshore gas rigs, and Lebanon are actually saying that the oil and gas sites are part of their economic waters. So there are maritime disputes going on with Lebanon. And this is quite serious. The UN chief warns that Israel-Hezbollah war would be a worst nightmare. So Israel, I believe today, have just signed a deal with Egypt for $15 billion for natural gas from these gas fields. So we can see everything's being set up for this final showdown, which is going to happen. There's going to be the Gog-Magog war. There's going to be the Psalm 83 war. Israel is basically going to be at war with everyone around them, all their neighbors, and they're going to win. The only time Israel aren't going to win is when the Antichrist comes in. Here we see Israel said to fear Assad's chemical weapons spillover into Golan Heights. Isaiah 17, the burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. So if Assad decides to fire chemical weapons into Israel, Israel will take Damascus out. So everything's being set up, everything's happening. Obviously there's terrible death and suffering which is happening in the world and all over the planet, really, and it can only go on for so long. Eventually God says enough, and he's going to bring this all to a close, all the suffering and all the pain that these people are going through. And this is just for the greed of man. This is just for men being wicked. That's what they are. Weapons and money and greed. So here we see Iran has 10 military bases in Syria, 2 near Israel border. So you'll know, I'm sure, that the Iranian base flew an unmanned UAV into Israel, and Israel shot it down and then went to destroy the base which was controlling the UAV. And when they went into Israel, it was done deliberately so that they could fire on the planes which were going to take out the UAV base. So as soon as that happened a couple of weeks ago, we saw Israel take out 12 covert military bases, which they don't even know how Israel knew where these bases were. And so we see that everything has been set up for this war, this final war, and the next war will be the final war. There's no question about it. There's not going to be another war and then a peace time. It's just not going to happen. The next war is going to kick off, is going to be that war. It's going to be the final war. It's going to be the one that culminates in the return of the Lord Jesus Christ, tribulation, and the Antichrist comes to take peace from the earth. So that's relative peace. It's not peace if you're living in Syria or if you're living in Yemen, but from a global perspective, we are living in peace times right now. And the Antichrist comes to take peace from the earth, and that starts off, that's going to be kicking off at the rapture of the church. And I don't know what else has to happen, but even the earth is warning us. Here we see Indonesia aviation warnings after Sumatra volcano emits ash cloud. This is February the 19th. This huge volcano is going off. So this was the largest eruption that has happened this year, and it's incredible. Not only in Indonesia, but we see in Mexico. You can see that, I'll just close that down. In Mexico volcano eruption update. Third earthquake hits Mexico. Will Popocatépetl erupt? That's their earthquake. That's their volcano, which is in Mexico. So we've got the Mexican volcano going off. We've even got Yellowstone eruption. saying, that there's been 10 earthquakes in one day. That was today. The warnings are there, and the warnings are plenty. Not just Indonesia and Mexico and Yellowstone, but also the Canary Islands around Spain. Canary Islands volcano hit by 70 earthquakes, sparking emergency response. Again, that was a couple of days ago. So all of these things are warning us. The day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night, in which the elements shall pass away with a fervent heat. The mankind is going to be burned in the tribulation. The wrath of God is going to burn the earth, once by water, once by fire. God will baptize the earth in fire like he did in water. By the same word has it been reserved unto judgment of the great day. God is going to judge the earth by fire. The earth mourneth and languisheth. The earth is taken away. And God makes it very, very clear all over the Bible that the tribulation of man cannot be survived. You can't survive tribulation. You can't survive the wrath of God. Most people are going to die. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the wrath of God. Most people are going to die. Not all people, but most of the earth is going to die in the wrath of God, and it's going to be done by fire and by unpleasant things which are going to happen to this world. So if you haven't repented yet, I suggest you do. I suggest you make yourself safe under the blood of Jesus Christ, and you ensure that you have a relationship with the Lord, that he knows your name, that he knows your heart, that you are longing to be with him, that you are not loving this world, and you're not deceived by the god of this world, who is Satan. And the hatred of sin is the beginning of wisdom, and the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, and he hates sin, and to have a heart after God's own heart. And the more that we become holy, the more we become sanctified, the more we recognize our own corruption, and the more we recognize our own fallenness. And we need to understand the serious situation that the fall of mankind has put us under. And but praise the Lord, he's given us victory, and he's given us salvation, and he's given us escape and mercy and grace and all the wonderful things that God has given us in his Son, Jesus Christ. I hope you enjoyed. Speak to you soon. Love you lots. Hope to see you in the sky.